Welcome to Part 2 of the SF424 Virtual Learning Series, presented by the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, Office of Conservation Investment, Division of Financial Assistance Support and Oversight, Systems and Training Branch. Part 2 focuses on completing Office of Management and Budget, OMB, Standard Form 424A, Budget Information for Non-Construction Programs, also referred to as the SF424A. Applicants complete this form when applying for non-construction federal financial assistance funding opportunities. This video provides applicants with guidance on how the form should be completed for Fish and Wildlife Service funding opportunities. It does not speak to situations where an SF424A may need to be completed for an amendment or revision to an existing award or submitted with a request for continuation funding. Contact your Service Project Officer for instructions on completing the SF424A based on these specific non-construction award situations. Applicants can access the SF424A from the Grant Solutions application kit associated with the funding opportunity they're applying for. If the applicant is waived from using Grant Solutions, the current version of the form can be downloaded from grants.gov. Once downloaded, applicants can either complete the form electronically or print the form and complete the fields manually. Next slide. On this slide is page 1 of the form, Section A, Budget Summary. This section provides a high-level summary of your application budget. You'll enter information about your current federal funding request in row 1. Highlighted here with a red box, boxes 1A and 1B, are the name of the service funding program and the corresponding 5-digit assistance listing number for the funding opportunity, formerly called the Catalog of Federal Domestic Assistance Number. For example, Sport Fish Restoration 15.605 or National Wildlife Refuge Fund 15.656. Grant Solutions auto-populates these boxes when you complete your application in the system. For waived applicants, the service funding program name and its corresponding assistance listing number can be found in the Notice of Funding Opportunity. You'll complete row 1, boxes 1C through 1F, highlighted here with a red box, in one of two ways depending on your funding request situation. In scenario number 1, you are requesting the full amount of funding for the proposed project at the start of the award. In this scenario, enter 0 in boxes 1C, Estimated Unobligated Federal Funds, and 1D, Estimated Unobligated Non-Federal Funds. In box 1E, New or Revised Budget Federal Funds, enter the total amount of federal funds requested from the federal program for this application. In box 1F, New or Revised Budget Non-Federal Funds, enter the amount of any non-federal cost-sharing or matching contributions to the proposed project. Cost-sharing or matching contributions include recipient and third-party cash and third-party in-kind contributed to the proposed project as part of the federal program's mandatory matching requirement or as a voluntary committed cost-share contribution. If there will be no non-federal contribution, enter 0 in box 1F. In scenario number 2, you are requesting partial or incremental funding for the proposed project that will span multiple years. In this scenario, start with boxes 1E and 1F and enter the total amount of federal funds you're requesting for the current funding period and non-federal funds you're contributing to the proposed project. Then, in boxes 1C and 1D, enter the amount of federal and non-federal funds that are being requested in future funding periods. For example, you're applying for a total award of $30,000 with no cost-sharing or matching requirement with a 3-year period of performance. You request that $10,000 be authorized by the federal program during each year of the award, subject to the future availability of federal funds. In this example, shown here in bold, you'd enter $20,000 in box 1C, 0 in box 1D, $10,000 in box 1E, and 0 in box 1F. Box 1G, highlighted here with a red box, is the total of the dollar amounts in boxes 1C through 1F. This is the total federal award amount you're requesting from the federal program in your application. Grant Solutions automatically completes this calculation. Waived applicants completing the form electronically will also find this field automatically calculates. In our previous example, the total federal award request in Box G is $30,000. Rows 2 through 4, highlighted here with a red box, are used to identify any additional federal programs that are or may be providing funding to assist with the proposed project. In each row, identify the federal grant program, its assistance listing number, and the amount of federal and non-federal funds contributed to the project under that federal program, similar to row 1. If no additional federal programs will be contributing funding, leave rows 2 through 4 blank. If more than 3 additional federal programs are contributing funding, provide the additional program funding information in a separate attachment. Lastly, highlighted here with a red box is row 5, which is the total of the amounts in columns C through G. Grant Solutions automatically completes these calculations. They are also auto-calculated for waived applicants completing the form electronically. Box 5G is the total award amount requested from all federal funding programs for the proposed project. Next slide. On this slide is page 2 of the form, Section B, Budget Categories. This section provides the estimated dollar amounts for expenditures by budget or object class for your application. The dollar amounts entered under each federal program in columns 1 through 4 are for the total requested federal award. It includes both federal funds and any required or voluntarily committed non-federal funds, if applicable. The names of the federal programs providing funding for the application auto-populate in columns 1 through 4 in Box 6 based on entries made in Section A, boxes 1A through 4A as applicable. These are highlighted here in the red box. If more than 4 federal programs will be providing funding, provide additional columns of budget information in a separate attachment. We will walk through each row individually, highlighting each row with a red box as we go. In Box 6, Row A, enter the amount of funds estimated for personnel costs for each federal program. Personnel costs generally include the salaries or wages of the recipient organization's employees who will be performing the activities of the proposed project during the award period of performance. Personnel costs can often be the largest budget cost category of a federal award. Review 2 CFR 200.430 Compensation Personal Services to determine what personnel costs may be allowable to charge to a federal award and the standards for adequate documentation. Enter 0 if you're not requesting personnel costs from the federal program. In Box 6, Row B, enter the amount of funds estimated for fringe benefits for each federal program. Fringe benefits are generally those allowances and services provided by an employer to their employees as part of their compensation package, above and beyond the employee's regular salaries and wages. Examples of fringe benefits include, but are not limited to, the cost of leave, such as sick, vacation, military, and family-related, health and life insurance, pensions or other retirement-type benefits, Social Security, unemployment benefits, severance payments, and tuition waivers or reductions. Review 2 CFR 200.431 Compensation Fringe Benefits to better understand the circumstances that may affect the allowability of fringe benefits to be charged to a federal award. Enter 0 if you're not requesting fringe benefits from the federal program. In Box 6, Row C, enter the amount of funds estimated for travel for each federal program. Travel costs include expenses for transportation, lodging, subsistence, meals, and other related items incurred by employees who are in travel status on official business of the recipient organization. Review 2 CFR 200.475 Travel Costs to better understand the circumstances that may affect the allowability of travel costs to be charged to a federal award and the travel scenarios that require prior approval from the service. If you're not requesting travel costs from the federal program, enter 0. In Box 6, Row D, enter the amount of funds that are estimated for equipment acquisition or depreciation for each federal program. Equipment is defined at 2 CFR 200.1. It is tangible personal property, including information technology systems, having a useful life of greater than 1 year and per unit acquisition cost which equals or exceeds the lesser of the capitalization level of the non-federal entity, or $5,000. General purpose equipment includes equipment which is not limited to research, medical, scientific, or other technical activities, such as motor vehicles, office equipment, printing equipment, and HVAC equipment. Special purpose equipment includes equipment that is used only for research, medical, scientific, or other technical activities. Examples include X-ray machines, microscopes, surgical instruments, fish stocking trucks, and electro-fishing boats. Review 2 CFR 200.439 Equipment and Other Capital Expenditures to better understand the circumstances that may affect the allowability of equipment costs to be charged to a federal award and the requirements for obtaining prior approval from the service. You should also review 2 CFR 200.436 Depreciation concerning charging depreciation costs of previously acquired equipment to a federal award. If you're not requesting equipment acquisition or depreciation costs from the federal program, enter 0. In Box 6, Row E, enter the amount of funds estimated for supplies for each federal program. Supplies are defined at 2 CFR 200.1 to include all tangible personal property other than those described as equipment. Examples include office supplies, field supplies, lab supplies, general supplies, and office furniture. Review 2 CFR 200.314 Supplies to better understand the requirement for the use and disposition of supplies acquired under a federal award. If you're not requesting supplies from the federal program, enter 0. In Box 6, Row F, enter the amount of funds estimated for contractual costs for each federal program. Contracts are defined at 2 CFR 200.1 to mean those legal instruments by which the applicant purchases and obtains property or services needed to carry out a project or program under a federal award. Contracts do not include those legal instruments, even if the applicant considers it a contract when the substance of the transaction meets the definition of a federal award or subaward at 2 CFR 200.1. Best practice is to include subaward costs in Box 6, Row H, Other. If you're not requesting contractual costs from the federal program, enter 0. In Box 6, Row G, enter the amount of funds estimated for construction and other types of capital expenditures for each federal program. Capital expenditures are defined at 2 CFR 200.1 as expenditures to acquire capital assets or to make additions, improvements, modifications, replacements, rearrangements, reinstallations, renovations, or alterations to capital assets that materially increase their value or useful life. Capital assets means tangible or intangible assets used in operations having a useful life of more than 1 year, which are capitalized in accordance with generally accepted accounting principles, GAAP. Examples of capital assets include land, buildings, facilities, equipment, and intellectual property. Review 2 CFR 200.439 Equipment and Other Capital Expenditures to better understand the circumstances that affect the allowability of these costs to be charged to a federal award and the requirements for obtaining prior approval from the service. If you're not requesting construction or capital expenditure costs from the federal program, enter 0. In Box 6, Row H, enter the amount of funds estimated for all other direct costs for each federal program. Costs included in this category may differ from applicant to applicant. They may include, but are not limited to, subawards, rental costs of buildings and facilities, printing and postage costs, conference costs, employee training, participant support costs, recruitment costs, and relocation costs. Be cautious that you do not include costs in the other budget category that are already included in your organization's federally negotiated indirect cost rate or other budget cost categories. Review the cost principles at 2 CFR 200 Subpart E to better understand the circumstances that may affect the allowability of other costs to be charged to a federal award and any requirements for obtaining prior approval from the service. If you're not requesting any other costs from the federal program, enter 0. In Box 6, Row I, Total Direct Charges, are the totals of the amounts entered in rows A through H for each federal program. Grant Solutions automatically completes these calculations. Waived applicants completing the form electronically will also find these fields automatically calculate. In Box 6, Row J, enter the amount of funds estimated for the allocable amount of indirect costs for each federal program. Per 2 CFR 200.1, indirect costs are those costs that are incurred for a common or joint purpose, benefiting more than one cost objective, and not readily assignable to the cost objective specifically benefited without an effort disproportionate to the results achieved. The types of organizational costs that may be classified as indirect costs often vary from applicant to applicant. Applicants who are individuals not associated with a business or nonprofit organization are not eligible to charge indirect costs and should enter 0. Applicants without an approved negotiated indirect cost rate agreement are prohibited from charging indirect costs to a federal award. If an approved indirect rate is not established during the award period of performance, all costs otherwise allocable as indirect costs are unallowable to the federal award. If no indirect costs are being requested from the federal program, enter 0. In Box 6, Row K are the totals of amounts entered in rows I and J and equals the total amount being requested from each federal program. They should also match the amounts listed in boxes 1G through 4G of Section A. In column 5 are the totals for each budget or object class category amount in rows A through K from all federal programs that are contributing funding to the proposed project. Grant Solutions automatically completes these calculations. Waived applicants completing the form electronically will also find these fields automatically calculate. Finally, in row 7, enter the amount of program income that you anticipate will be earned during the award period of performance under column 1. Enter anticipated program income amounts to be earned during the period of performance of any other contributing federal program as applicable under columns 2 through 4. Program income is defined at 2 CFR 200.1 to include gross income earned by the non-federal entity that is directly generated by a supported activity or earned as a result of the federal award during the period of performance. Leave row 7 blank if program income is not anticipated. Next slide. On this slide is page 3 of the form and contains 4 separate sections. Let's walk through each section separately. In the first section, highlighted in the red box, is Section C, Non-Federal Resources. This section details the sources of non-federal cost-sharing or matching contributions to the proposed project, if applicable. Remember, cost-sharing or matching contributions may be required by the federal funding program or voluntarily committed to the project by the applicant. These contributions may be provided as recipient and third-party cash and any allowable third-party in-kind. The names of the federal programs providing funding for the application auto-populate in boxes 8A through 11A, highlighted in the red box, based on entries made in Section A, boxes 1A through 4A as applicable. If more than 4 federal programs will be providing funding, provide additional rows of budget information in a separate attachment. In column B, highlighted in the red box, enter the amount of non-federal funds you are contributing as cost share or match to the federal programs listed in rows 8 through 11. If you are not contributing any match, enter 0. In column C, highlighted in the red box, enter the amount of non-federal cash or third-party in-kind matching contributions from one or more state agencies, if applicable. You should verify that these matching contributions are not from federal sources. If no state agencies will be contributing non-federal funds as match, enter 0. In column D, highlighted in the red box, enter the amount of non-federal cash or third-party in-kind matching contributions from all other sources if applicable. If no other sources will be contributing non-federal funds as match, enter 0. In column E, highlighted in the red box, are the totals by row of amounts entered in columns B, C, and D. These represent the total amounts of all non-federal funding contributed to the proposed project under each federal program. In row 12, highlighted in the red box, are the total amounts of non-federal funding provided by the applicant, state, and other sources. Grant Solutions automatically completes the column E and row 12 calculations. Waived applicants completing the form electronically will also find these fields automatically calculate. The next section, highlighted in the red box, is section D, Forecasted Cash Needs. This section estimates the amount of awarded funds needed to satisfy your cash needs in each quarter during the first year of the federal award. The estimates in this section help the service monitor payments dispersed to award recipients as compared to performance expectations or milestones met. 2 CFR 200.305 requires award recipients to minimize the time between the receipt and disbursement of funds. For state recipients, payment procedures are governed by their Treasury State Cash Management Improvement Act agreements and the default procedures at 31 CFR 205. In rows 13 and 14, highlighted in the red box, enter realistic estimates of your federal and non-federal cash needs for the proposed project from all federal and non-federal sources during the first, second, third, and fourth quarters of the first year of the federal award. Row 15 and the total for first year fields, highlighted in the red boxes, will automatically sum each quarterly column and the amounts in each row once entered. Now, highlighted in the red box is section E, Budget Estimates of Federal Funds Needed for Balance of the Project. This section estimates for the service the amount of federal funds from each federal program that will be needed in the future to complete the proposed project. The form captures up to 4 future funding years. If your project requires more than 4 additional funding years, provide this information in a separate attachment. The names of the federal programs providing funding for this application auto-populate in boxes 16A through 19A, highlighted in the red box, based on entries made in Section A, boxes 1A through 4A as applicable. If more than 4 federal programs will be providing funding, provide additional rows of budget information in a separate attachment. In row 16, highlighted in the red box, enter the amount of estimated federal funding that is needed during the first, second, third, and fourth future funding periods in columns B through E. Typically, each future funding period will be a federal fiscal year. Complete the boxes in column B through E for any additional federal programs listed in rows 17A through 19A if future funding obligations will be needed from those programs to complete the proposed project. If you are requesting a full funding obligation for the proposed project at the start of the award from all federal funding sources, you do not need to complete this section. Row 20, highlighted in the red box, is the total amount of estimated federal funding listed in columns B through E needed for the balance of the project in future funding periods. Grant Solutions in the electronic form automatically calculate these fields. Lastly, highlighted in the red box is Section F, Other Budget Information. This section is an optional section that is used to provide the service with other details about your proposed budget, such as information on direct and indirect costs, and information that may be required by the federal funding program statute, regulation, or notice of funding opportunity. In box 21, highlighted in the red box, enter information to describe and justify the amounts in the individual direct budget or object class categories you identified in section B. If budget details are provided in a separate budget narrative, you may enter C, Attached Budget Narrative. If indirect costs will be charged to the federal award, enter the approved indirect rate, the type of rate, estimated amount of distribution base to which the rate will be applied, and the total indirect expense in box 22, highlighted in the red box. Refer to your negotiated indirect cost rate agreement for the rate and rate type details. Review the Service Program's Notice of Funding Opportunity for any additional indirect cost information that you may be required to include in your application or on the form. If budget details are provided in a separate budget narrative, you may enter See Attached Budget Narrative. Finally, in box 23, highlighted in the red box, enter any additional remarks or information concerning your budget. If there is insufficient space in this box, provide the information in a separate attachment and enter See Remarks Attachment. This box is often useful for applicants to identify the types of costs included in the Other object class category in Section B, such as subawards, participant support costs, conferences, or training. Review the service program's Notice of Funding Opportunity for any specific information that you should include in box 23. If budget details are provided in a separate budget narrative, you may enter See Attached Budget Narrative. Next slide. On behalf of the FASO training team, we hope this instructional video has been helpful in understanding how to complete the SF424A. If you have any further questions, please consult with the Service Project Officer identified in the Notice of Funding Opportunity or directed announcement. Have a great day.